Welcome, another episode of Practical Female Psychology. We're on Chapter 4, Female Basic Conflict. So this one's an interesting chapter. It goes over all the different types of conflict, the lover, the provider dynamic. In order, we're going to talk about basic female conflict, the lover and provider dichotomy, dissociation, the dangers of being strictly a provider, female projection, female ambivalence, and practical advice. To start off, we'll use a quote here from Franco, in that truly understanding the psychology of women requires being aware of a fundamental conflict in the nature of women's relationships with men. Women are more sexually attracted to men who are less inclined to provide for them. That is, in their heart, chicks love to love bad boys, but in their heads they know nice guys make much better husbands. This is to a T what Rollo Tomasi and most guys in the red pill talk about when they talk about the alpha fucks and beta bucks. I'm sure you've heard the term before. Girls essentially have two ways of processing men. That's their limbic brain and their frontal lobe. Now, the limbic brain, pure sexual desire, or what you would think of as alpha behaviors. That's all they're concerned about. The frontal lobe side of things is worried more about practical matters, like is he going to be a good father? Does he have a good job? Can he provide for me? Is he going to be kind? That sort of stuff. And these two realms never cross. Now, ideally, a guy can do both. He can be a good father one day, and the next day he can be a downright asshole, tap into that emotions when he needs it sexually, and tap into the providership when the kids need it, protection-wise. But in general, especially when first interacting with women, first starting to date, gotten to the point before you've already had 5 kids, just be aware that you're going to be lumped into one category or another, and depending on what phase of life a girl is in, that either can work for you or against you. Next section is the lover-provider dichotomy. Now, they describe lover in this case as the lover is a man with whom women can freely express their sexuality without having to be worried about that man attempting to exert control over her, either in a physical way or with respect to her material well-being, and without having to be worried about being morally judged by that man. This one here, huge thing. So there's a couple concepts that we talk about within the red pill that kind of make sense here. First one is being non-judgmental, being open, being honest. Fun fact, most girls, when they talk about what is it that they talk about when they mean chemistry with the guy, and one girl put it in perfect perspective on Twitter of all places. It's that the man makes her feel comfortable enough that she can just start brain dumping every one of her little emotional thoughts. It's a certain level of, and I know it sounds weird because comfort is mostly a beta category, but to provide enough safety that the other person feels non-judged and able to express themselves fully. Now, from a male standpoint, this is awesome. One, if you're looking to see if she's going to be a girlfriend for a night, nobody cares. The more she talks, the more dopamine she gets, and the more she associates those good feelings with you being around. Obviously works in your benefit. At the same time, if you're in one of those situations where you're trying to see, is this girl worth more? Should I maybe promote her from just being a one-night stand to a plate? Should I promote her from a plate to a girlfriend? I'm thinking about popping the question and ruining my life with the marriage. Is this the one for me? This is where this stuff comes in handy. You keep the judgment to yourself. And if all of a sudden you make a small confession, hey, just so you know, and you just make something up, doesn't really matter, as long as it makes you look bad. But it opens up the other person to be comfortable to say, oh yeah, it was crazy. I got a train run on me by a football team. Or yeah, I used to have a heroin habit, but I think I've shed that a couple months ago. But the point is, by being open and honest, you're going to get, or not honest as it stands, you're going to get a lot of openly honest appreciation back. Now, you can do with that information what you will. If the girl opens up and you find that there's nothing but skeletons in that closet, well, then they belong in the streets. But at least now you know because you kept your stupid mouth shut and didn't start judging her like some goofy MGTOW. The second side of things is the provider. So a provider, on the other hand, can be defined as a man who has agreed to take responsibility for the woman and her children, both financially and emotionally. This is usually accompanied by exerting power over the woman. Now, when they say exerting power over the woman, I want us not to think of it as in like he's got her heart, he's got alpha by raising the kids and doing dishes and paying the bills. That's not what they mean there. By control, they mean taking responsibility for. In this case, she can stay at home and be a stay-at-home mom while he raises the kids. While she's pregnant, he's going to run to the store and get olives and ice cream and whatever nonsense she wants. Sometimes it's even just a small thing there when, you know, you're sitting on the couch, she's sitting on the couch, she's watching TikTok, you're watching one of these wonderful videos on YouTube. She just looks over and asks, can you get her a glass of water? Now, her legs aren't broken, she's perfectly capable of it, but it's these little congruence tests to see if you can be a provider. And it's kind of weird because I'm guessing most of you guys have had these weird tests. Can you take this plate to the dishwasher? Can you grab me this glass of water? And normally, because you're like, whatever, I'm a guy, I don't mind doing this stuff for you. You're great after all. You did just go down on me last night. Realize though that sometimes it's good to just draw a line in the sand over some nonsense purpose, because all you're doing is setting an established pattern of behavior for you to be a provider. And it's not always the best thing. While girls get to run on feelings, unfortunately, as a guy, you have to be more deliberate with your actions. So just keep that in mind. For disassociation, the lover-provider dichotomy often presents itself psychologically as an act of dissociation in women. This occurs so often due to the oppression of female sexuality throughout history. As a modern man, you need to fully understand what is involved in the phenomenon known as dissociation. Disassociation is a state of acute mental decompensation in which certain thoughts, emotions, sensations, or memories are compartmentalized because they are too overwhelming of the conscious mind to integrate. An example of disassociation is this. And they're going to go into a bunch of examples, but the key ones here. If you start trying to act like a girl's friend while you want to smash, she is going to start disassociating her sexual nature. She is going to start saying, I have to go to work in the morning. We shouldn't do this. I'm not that kind of girl. I have a 3-date rule. Meanwhile, last night with the guy who didn't bring up those disassociative behaviors because he's being incongruent as a lover or a provider. But, and here's the part where disassociation comes in. Since the limbic brain is the primary driver of this stuff, a girl will wholeheartedly believe it. So by disassociation here, this is one of the ways that self-deception manifests in a sexual standpoint. In this case, I just went over to his house, but nothing happened. And her heart of hearts, she believes it because you're creating that disassociation by the judgmental nature of the way the interaction is going. Again, the two things to avoid in all this are to be incongruent with whether you want to be the lover or the provider in that interaction, and whether you have enough of a judgmental attitude that she has to have what they would call an anti-slut defense kick up and prevent her from seeing reality for what it is, and instead just avoiding her feelings by changing her truth to meet her expectations. I'm sure there's a lot of traditional conservative guys that love the idea of being the provider, nothing but gratitude. Well, there are some dangers to it though, and this is why a lot of guys kind of call it being a beta male, which isn't entirely accurate. It's being too much of a beta male. But to quote here, in Western countries in the 21st century, we find ourselves in precisely such a situation. Women no longer have much of a practical need to manipulate a man into serving as a provider to them, and women therefore find that they are struggling to unlearn these manipulative behaviors. This is a difficult process because on one hand, such manipulative behavior can still be fruitful to a woman in terms of survival in today's world, but on the other hand, such behavior often brings intentional and external conflict to the woman. As a modern man, you need to be able to read this conflict in women on the fly as part of her ongoing internal process. You will need to be able to objectively analyze this conflict on an ongoing basis as it occurs within the particular woman in front of you. Key point to take away from this one is this is almost a female version of what I refer to as sexual diabetes, and I've talked about it in plenty of videos. If you followed the channel, you already know this. This is where we take the example of normal diabetes. I mean, humans were wired to really crave simple carbohydrates because it allowed us to have quick bursts of energy, hunt better deer, get more food, bang more cave stacies, make more cave babies, and the cycle repeats. And so we kind of genetically predisposed to want it. Now, in the 21st century, we have sugar. And sugar is condensed simple carbohydrates. So before, you wouldn't get diabetes because you'd have to chew on a sugarcane root for 20 minutes to get just enough energy to do a hunt. Now you can eat a whole cake in a sitting. God knows why you're doing that. Here's the problem though. That instinct, which was a survival instinct a little while back, is now killing us, diabetes. And again, I argue thirst and scarcity and being a provider are kind of the sexual version of diabetes for men. In a female's case, their need to manipulate the men around them for better provision is the same thing for them. The only difference is they externalize the danger to men. This is manifested in all kinds of ways. I mean, the Me Too movement, for the most part, is female manipulation done for the purposes of resource acquisition, if you cut it down to its core. And yeah, it's supposed to be for stopping sexual harassment, but it didn't really. I mean, Harvey Weinstein got off on all charges, so just take that for what it's worth. I guess they got Cosby, whatever. But since it's a hardwiring thing, even if a girl is into you, even if she loves you, even if she thinks you're the greatest thing ever, even if you got alpha coming out of your pores and growing off of your face like this great beard and there's still a chin underneath that can hold it, she'll still do this stuff. It's just the nature of the beast. I'm sure you've heard the parable of the scorpion and the frog. Same thing. But some examples here they use that you can know if you're being too much of a provider and you're starting to get those disassociative behaviors, boredom, a massive lowering of sexual attraction, and in some cases, even outright contempt towards the man. These are the warning signs. These are the things you got to see. And you'll notice this in field reports. Once you keep an eye out for them, you're going to start noticing when the writing is on the wall for the guy. Now, it's very easy to spot another guy. Try to spot him in your own relationship because that's the one that matters for you. Charles Bukowski, Jordan Peterson, Neil Strauss. I like these guys. Add some salt to cover up the bitterness of middle-aged soccer moms and put in the oven for 45 minutes. Optionally, you can take from all this stuff what you want and leave the rest. Female projection, again, another very important concept in here, and they quote, "An important feature of female psychology is the projection of her emotions and needs onto the environment. In other words, women tend to automatically place the responsibility for their emotions and needs onto their immediate environment. People with psychological educations know that this is actually a trait of borderline personality disorder. Now, obviously, the vast majority of women do not suffer from BPD, but it's interesting that this trait is apparently a normal part of psychologically healthy women in a reduced sense." This part, I love this part because it ties in why so much of psychology is kind of missing the point. From a red pill standpoint, there's two disorders: narcissistic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. And they think of these as, traits that predominantly happen within women or predominantly happen with men, and the disorder is too much of it. And then people take that going, well, if too much narcissism is bad, then a little bit must be bad too. And if too much BPD is bad, well, then BPD must be bad too. But they're forgetting it's not a disease, it's a disorder. And the difference is a disorder takes 100% of humans and takes a behavior pattern, in this case, narcissism for men or borderline personality for women. They draw a line around the third standard deviation. That means the top 1% of people that act extreme on a certain trait. And then they just call that a disorder, saying that they have too much woman to handle society here. If you can't handle me at my best, you don't deserve me at my worst. But that's the point. That's not to say these traits are inherently bad. These traits are masculine and feminine, respectively. Narcissism for men, borderline for women. But having too much of it is a bad thing. Now, the two takeaways from this are A, that means maybe 1 out of every 20 women is going to be BPD. And that just means extreme woman. Same thing as 1 out of every 20 men is going to be NPD or extreme man. Most people have just various 1 to 2 degrees of separation from that. So they're still going to act like this. So if you're wondering, why can't my woman just be like a man? Why can't girls just hit on guys? Why can't girls be less borderline? Well, what you're asking them to do is be less woman. And again, this is why the book says it's really not the place for you to be reading this if you're still within the anger phase, because you have to understand all of these horrible traits, all of these horrible things that a lot of guys love to complain about, like hypergamy and, borderline and all this stuff. It's what makes women. And your goal is just to diagnose, more or less. Does she have enough of it that I can handle it? Or is there too much? And just enjoy the ride for while it lasts and don't let her know where my lives are. Female ambivalence here. The evolutionary positive gain for the woman is to use her ambivalence as she keeps her options open. And in this way, she can gain advantages from as many sources as possible. For example, a woman will often achieve material advantage with a provider and sexual pleasure with a lover and successfully rule over both of them if these men do not have the skills to deal with her manipulation. The secret wish of every woman is to find a man who is able to build a safe and strong masculine Lang structure around her female yin. Ambivalence. Now, I use a much more crass definition here. I just say girls hate taking responsibility for decisions because the chance of failure is there, and girls are terrified of rejection. Insofar as guys are afraid of rejection, we would think of a 2 out of 10 fear of rejection in the same way a girl thinks of an 8 out of 10 fear of rejection. It's just not on the same scoreboard. And in this way, the female coping strategy around this is just ambivalence. Ambivalence. Well, I don't want to pick this, that, or the other thing. Well, I'd rather things fail than be my fault. And this ambivalence kind of manipulates guys and encourages them to step up. I wrote an article about this where I talk about the 5 types of manipulation. And this is often where you'll see A, anger, and B, wounding. A lot of girls will portray to the world that they're on pills, they're such broken people, and their last boyfriend was horrible, and then the guy has that automatic need to want to step up and save her, Captain Save-A-Ho. These ambivalent forces that they use are a way to manipulate guy to be more of a provider in their life. And then the thing to take away from that is it's not a bug, it's a feature. It's just how women are wired. The trick is you can't let it affect you, because if it does, you're still not going to get what you want. It's just going to cost you a hell of a lot more than you would have otherwise. Again, don't like getting manipulated unless there's something in it for you. They end off with some practical advice. So understand that women will unconsciously test and test vigorously, and they will slot you into either the lover or provider category. For example, a woman may demand that you pay for her dinner or movie ticket while reciting some randomly used line such as, "A gentleman always pays." This will not be a problem for you if you've already decided well in advance the type of man that you are and what a woman can expect from her time with you. A lot of guys take this and they still have the wrong attitude. They think, how can I manipulate a girl into treating me as one or the other? And to be frank, she's made her decision before you've even opened your mouth and said 2 or 3 words. Just by approaching her, just by walking up, the way you start that interaction, your body language, your eye movement, and all that other stuff, in her mind, she's already categorized you one way or the other. The problem comes is when that's happened, and then you try to manipulate her into thinking the other one. It causes a huge state of incongruence, where they say, he walked up like an alpha, but he keeps trying to buy me dinner. What's going on with this? Again, it's a limbic brain response. Something seems very weird, and a lot of the times, girls have a word to describe this, and the word that they use is creepy. If you're creepy, that means they can't figure out how to categorize you, and so they have to assume there's a manipulation. Again, women are a very risk-averse species, and when in doubt, assume the person's a threat. So in this case, the takeaway from this is to be congruent. You can't just use tips and tricks to get into a girl's pants. You can't just use tips and tricks to find yourself a wife. You have to act congruent one way or the other to get what you want, and you have to be aware of when you've been properly or improperly categorized and just cut the interaction. Because in the same way you can't turn a hoe into a housewife, you can't turn a provider into a lover, although you can turn a lover into a provider. At that point, just add some comfort, kisses on the forehead, and then she'll eventually cry and say, what are we? Why aren't we together? Can you stop seeing other girls, please? And then you can kind of make the decision for yourself. But that's this chapter, Practical Female Psychology, Chapter 4, Female Basic Conflict. Again, next week, we're going to hit on Chapter 5. I hope you enjoy it. If you want to talk about this one more in depth, we got the Patreon community. Come on in, give it a shot. We don't charge till the end of the month. And as always, you can see a lot of these rules distilled into not only personal anecdotes, but philosophical understanding of the nature of men and women and a guy finding his own in the world through my book, Fuck Files, which is in Amazon, Kindle, and Audible right now. Link for those in the description, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Cheers.